I'm joined for Generation Gap today by Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North, and Jess Gill, who is a political commentator. Thank you for joining me. Do you know what generation you're in, Barry?
Well, I think you've put me in the sort of young to middle, but...
Yeah, well, Barry, I think you might be I don't want to say, are you an X, a Z? Maybe you know. What do you think? Are you a millennial?
I'm a Zoomer, a Gen Z, a member of Gen Z.
Right, all right. Well, look, there is a gap between you.
I'm a boomer and you're a Zoomer.
Boomer to Zoomer, that's what we like on Generation Gap. So we're going to talk about strikes. We've obviously got this February the 1st date coming. It's like a national day of striking. Just to go through the list: teachers, uni staff, train drivers, civil servants. Then we're expecting more NHS workers to go on strike and ambulance workers again after that February the 1st date. Barry, this striking is holding the country to ransom. It's not fair. It's not right. Some of the people in these positions of authority shouldn't be able to go on strike at all.
You've just listed teachers, ambulance drivers, nurses. Nurses have never been on strike before, I think, in my lifetime. So many people in this country feel that they're not being treated fairly and that they are not being rewarded properly for the work that they do. Now, you and I, Camilla, were out on our doorsteps, and I'm sure Jess was as well, applauding those people, these essential workers during the pandemic, and now you're saying that they're holding the country to ransom and that they're the enemy within. No,
well, the police can't strike, the nurses can.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But of course, what the nurses did and what the ambulance drivers did was they made sure that the essential services of the ambulance care for emergency calls were all provided. All of that was done. The point is this: we are seeing people, nurses, teachers, actually having to go to food banks to feed their kids. That's wrong.
OK, Jess,
and we need a fair society.
As the Zoomer here, presumably you are pro the worker. You want strikes to happen because you're young and engaged in the political scene and you support what Barry's saying.
Well, for one, I am pro-worker, but I'm also pro-consumer, and I think it's completely unfair on the British public. I think it's a lose-lose situation either way. I don't think nurses deserve a lower pay, or any of these sectors, but also it's unfair on the British public. And I think it's not the workers who are at fault for this. If your pay was decreased by inflation, you'd want it to be increased. I think it's actually the politicians over here who are responsible for this.
Yes.
And I think that's the issue. I think we need to realise who's to blame here, and it's the government.
Yeah, well, look,
politicians are all to blame?
Jess and I absolutely agree, because the government could have intervened in the negotiations. They actually blocked the rail companies from having the negotiations. They put that 2% limit in place, and they said they weren't allowed to move beyond it. Now, in a situation where we've got food inflation now almost at 17%, this is just too much. And I think Jess is right. The government is to blame here.
But is it not a bit of a kind of old Labour, old school, your generation argument to be kind of being Scargill-esque about strikes when you've got a young woman here in Jess saying, well, this is, and it's a perfectly cogent argument, well, it might be fair to the workers on strike, but it isn't fair to the workers who need to go to the hospital that day or need to use the trains or need to use essential services.
You know, what I found really interesting about the way in which the reporting of the strikes has happened is at the beginning, a lot of reporters went out and did a vox pop. And the public almost universally were saying, look, of course, it is going to be inconvenient for me, but I understand why they're doing it.
Jess isn't saying that, Jess.
I mean, personally, it's caused me inconvenience. I know cousins who are in education, whether that be university or at secondary school, at school, and they're inconvenienced by this. We've had just lockdown a couple of years back. They're still suffering the consequences of that. I have elder family members who are reliant on the NHS and they will suffer the consequences of it. While I don't blame the workers, I still think that's the consequence of it. People are suffering in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
So it's wrong. It's wrong to grind people who are just starting out in life, like Jess and her friends. They're trying to get about, to do a good day's work, to not kind of have this work-shy tag that is often afflicted on the young. And yet at every turn, they're being stifled by people putting their own interests first.
No, look, I don't think that's fair, because actually young people are nurses. Young people are going into all of these professions, all of these, jobs. And what we see and what young people feel at the moment, and I can't speak for Jess, but many people that I talk to, young people that I talk to, are worried about the insecurity in work.
Okay.
It's the 0 hours contracts that bother them. They want a good job. They want a job, not necessarily for life, but they want a career path. They want to know that they're going to be properly rewarded.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Jess. Thank you very much, Barry, for that cross-generational chat.